I am a pretty big fan of the Yakuza franchise, to the point where I genuinely don't think there's a single bad game in the entire series. In fact, the Yakuza games are easily in my top 5 video game franchises of all time, and what I love about this franchise is there is no set ranking of the games. Every ranking that you look at is different and different in a lot of ways, well except for Yakuza 0 and 7. I think universally those are just incredible. I got into these games around 2012, 13 years ago, so I'm not an OG by any means whatsoever, considering the first game came out all the way back in 2005, and I didn't play the original games. But after playing almost all the Yakuza games that this behemoth of a franchise had to offer, I thought I would rank them all. Well, not all of them. I did not include Ishin, Dead Souls and the most recent Pirate Yakuza in this ranking. The first two I just haven't gotten around to playing. And for Pirate Yakuza, I played around 15 hours or so, but I had to put it on hold because of other major games that released around that time that just had more priority. But I will definitely be returning to it someday. Just not right now. So to substitute the missing games in this ranking, I've included both Judgment and Lost Judgment to make up for it. So yeah, in this video, I want to give my totally raw and honest ranking of the Yakuza games from the perspective of somebody that played almost all the games and got into the franchise 13 years ago. Also, I don't think I need to say this, but please just remember that this is subjective to my opinions and try not to get angry. But before I get into it, let's talk about the best video game deals that you could ask for. It's summer, and at any point of the year, it's always the best time to treat yourself or somebody else to a great game. Just please don't go gifting Mind's Eye. Seriously, if you give somebody Mind's Eye, you either hate them or just don't know better. Instead, head over to Instant Gaming, where you can get the best deals on any game at any time. So you don't need to wait for Black Friday or any type of traditional sale. Instant Gaming has fantastic discounts on a ton of great titles from all sorts of genres. Personally, I've been eyeing a few must-plays from some brilliant franchises. One of them being Monster Hunter Wilds, which I unfortunately missed out on launch. So now is the best time to catch up on these games that I missed without even breaking the bank whatsoever. So yeah, definitely check out Instant Gaming for the best video game deals. Link is right there in the description, but don't wait around too long. These kinds of deals do not last forever. Placing Yakuza 4 at the bottom of my ranking may come as a surprise, given how there is a lot, and I mean a lot, to like about the game. But this placement isn't a matter of disliking the game, it's about how it compares to the rest of the Yakuza franchise, and where it falls short when measured against my personal expectations and experiences with Yakuza as a whole. Now, this game was released in 2010, so it is a tad bit dated, but still enjoyable. And one of the game's big selling points is the 4 protagonist structure, which is clearly the main selling point of the game. It's an ambitious experiment that, while enjoyable, ultimately felt like a rough version of what Yakuza 5 would, in my opinion, do better. The story feels like one disjointed, tangled, weird, I have no idea what it was trying to tell, and the concept of being invested in one character and the game then yanking you into the next, I never felt like I got enough time to really connect with each of them. However, there are some fantastic characters. You know, for example, Akiyama, he's one of the highlights of the game, or even the Yakuza franchise as a whole. And I mean that in terms of, you know, his character himself, the relationship with Hana, the giga chad that he is, so even just his flashy combat style. Same goes for Kiryu and Saejima. I mean, I don't think I need to explain why they are standouts. Now, this is a hot take, and I know I'll get a lot of shit for this, but I did not like Tanemura whatsoever. I know he's a hyped up character, and many fans of Yakuza often refer to him as the hidden gem, but not for me. And I mean that story wise and even in his combat. His cop story is just way too generic, and his fighting is an interesting idea, you know, a parrying slash counter system, but it feels like a mess, especially during the bigger fights. Against, you know, single enemies, I actually like his combat a lot. Plus, his final boss fight is one of my least favorites in the entirety of Yakuza as a whole. The main issue is that it completely clashes with the way Tanemura plays. His final boss throws all of that out the window by overshadowing you with a shit ton of enemies, making it one of the most poorly designed fights in the entire series. When it comes to the story, I think a lot of story choices that RGG decided to go with, such as, you know, the rubber bullet twist for Saejima, which was a terrible idea, made this game feel retroactively inconsequential. Now I will give credit where it's due. The combat is a step up from Yakuza 3, but then again, is that really saying much considering Yakuza 3's combat is very questionable at best. Kamurocho in Yakuza 4 also feels more expanded here, with rooftops and back alleys adding a bit more verticality, and that is definitely a top tier addition. The sub-stories are quite interesting, but this is a game that didn't stick with me the way other games did. If you love Yakuza as a whole, you are gonna play this game regardless. Here's the thing about Yakuza 6. There's a lot to appreciate about it. The personal focused story, the emotional send-off, the more peaceful moments with Kiryu trying to figure out his place as a father figure, the new dragon engine. But even with all of that, Yakuza 6 still ended up second last in my ranking, and that's not because I hated it. Again, I have to reiterate myself, I don't hate any Yakuza games. It's just that Yakuza 6 feels like a game that did not have enough time to fully deliver on its potential. This is the first game that is built from the grounds up using the new, at the time, Dragon engine, and it improved on a lot in terms of visuals and overall gameplay. But I do remember at the time this game released, it did come with a lot of problems for many people. Some liked Yakuza 6, some did not. Let's start with the good. I really thought the tone of this story was well executed. After what we just had with Yakuza 5, and that game being a massive chaotic game with so many protagonists, it was definitely refreshing to have something smaller with one protagonist again. The story was more personal focused, and it showed us Kiryu's involvement with the mess Haruka is in, trying to be a dad to Haruto, and exploring a new setting being Onomichi, which I liked a lot. This setting felt so unique, and I believe it's one of the only settings that is based on real life. Thinking of it now, this game feels like a Yakuza DLC of a Yakuza game where Kiryu is in an alternate reality. Does that make sense? No? Okay. Now, one of the things that I appreciate about this game is RGG's approach to the setting and making it feel very alive. I mean, they quite literally voiced every NPC and made all the sub-stories fully voice acted, something that was never the case and is never the case in any Yakuza game. But that's because this was a smaller focused game. The Hirose family were pretty cool, despite Yuta looking exactly like Kuroiwa from Judgment, and I thought Sameya was a great character too, and even the main villain, I thought he was pretty decent. Plus that ending with the whole letters and fake death twist was very shocking at that time. Now yes, I guess you can complain about the lack of past characters not being involved like Maijima, Saijima and Daigo, and yes, I would have loved to see them more too, but I also respect the decision not to turn this game into a fan service finale. In terms of the negatives, I did feel like combat felt very stiff and basic. I know it was the first game on the Dragon engine, but it really shows. It just seemed like it lacked in heat actions, the movement felt a bit awkward, and there is no weapon system we're talking about. It all felt like a step back, especially if you were somebody that played this after Yakuza 0 or Kiwami 2, and the lack of style switching just made Kiryu feel less dynamic overall than he's used to. And yeah, content wise, it is shorter and smaller in scope. The side content is more chill, less goofy, and there's noticeably less to do compared to something like a Yakuza 5, which basically buried me in content, but I actually did not mind that. It felt more focused, and that was what this game was trying to do. So yeah, Yakuza 6 is a game I liked, but in a franchise that's full of bangers, saying I liked it doesn't really justify any place higher than the other games. Now this one isn't technically a mainline Yakuza game, as the word Gaiden quite literally means side story in Japanese, but I am still going to include it. Now this is a game that I didn't really have any expectations for going in, because I did not know what to expect from such a random side kind of game. Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name is first of all a very long name for a game, and second of all, it's a shorter game sandwiched between bigger titles, but it did end up leaving a stronger impression than I anticipated. I liked it a fair bit, but there are just more complete or impactful games in the franchise that stuck with me way more. When it comes to what I liked about it, well, the combat is genuinely fun. The two styles, Yakuza and Agent, are like two very different types of styles. It's like one is the classic beat 'em up which we all love, and the other is a more modernized tech version. Agent style with all of its ridiculous gadgets, especially the rocket shoes and the exploding cigarette I think it was, that gave Kiryu a totally new flavor without straying too far from what makes this fight satisfying. It's not, a super deep combat system by any means, and yes, it can get a bit repetitive, but it's responsive enough to carry the game's relatively short length. The story, while very slow to start, did feel like a bit of a chore, but it did pick up in the back half. I wasn't fully sold on the errand running for Akemi in the early chapters, but once the final act kicks in, It lands pretty hard. The ending was genuinely great, one of the most emotionally satisfying endings in the whole franchise, and there are maybe 2 or 3 moments in the entire Yakuza games where I cried, and this scene is easily one of them. It made the whole thing feel worthwhile, even if the setup for the entire game was a bit sluggish. The Colosseum in this game is easily one of the best features. It's very addicting and offers more replayability than I expected from such a smaller game, and I'm thinking of it now, it honestly does carry the experience in some ways. But despite all of that, Gaiden still feels limited. It's short, some mechanics are stripped down or simplified, and the lack of a new game plus is kind of strange. The side content is good for what's here, but you can feel that this wasn't meant to be a full-scale Yakuza game. So yeah, I like Gaiden, I really did. It's polished and has an incredible story finale, but when put against the mainline games and the bigger games, and even some of the Judgment games, it just doesn't reach the same heights. Now that we're nearly halfway through the ranking, I think, are we? I don't think we are. I think it's time to talk about one of the most divisive games in the entire Yakuza series by far, and that is Yakuza 5. A lot of people really don't like this one, and I get it. It may feel bloated, the pacing is inconsistent, the story is all over the place, and yes, Shinoda kind of shows up out of nowhere. But here's the thing, I like Yakuza 5. In fact, I liked it a lot more than most people do. It's not the best game in the franchise by any means, but it's certainly not the worst. It's the kind of game where its ambition is so overwhelming. It feels like you're playing 5 different Yakuza games smashed into one, and for me that's part of the appeal, and it does the multi-protagonist system way better than Yakuza 4 did. Now this game is absurdly big. Not only do you have 5 new characters, but you now have 5 different cities, and a staggering amount of side content. Each chapter literally feels like its own game. Kiryu's is a taxi driving simulator, Haruka's an idol star, Saijima's is a hunting survival story, Shinada's is a baseball themed underdog tale, and Akiyama, well, he's just Akiyama as always. It should not work, and sometimes it doesn't, but the sheer scope of it is impressive by even modern standards. Where most people drop off is the pacing. I won't lie, parts of Yakuza 5 feel like an absolute slug. Saijima's intro drags, and Haruka's dance battles, while different, are not for everyone. And then there's Shinada, who shows up in the final stretch, but ends up stealing some scenes with a surprisingly heartfelt story arc. His gameplay is very janky, but in a way it kind of fits his character quite well. The story is a hot mess, but an entertaining one. It juggles so many ideas that it barely holds itself together, but when it hits, it hits. Kiryu's arc in particular is heavy and emotional. Seeing him live anonymously as a taxi driver away from everything was one of the most kind of somber and powerful parts of his journey. And then even seeing that final scene in the snow, you know, that alone earns Yakuza 5 a higher spot in my video. But for me, the highlight of this game is easily the side content. It is everywhere and a lot of it is good. Taxi missions feel like short films, Saijima's stuff, idol competitions, chicken race, a bunch of, baseball drama. Some of the best sub-stories in the franchise are tucked away in Yakuza 5, and exploring them makes the world feel incredibly alive. It's not, perfect by any means whatsoever, far from it. But Yakuza 5 is weird and full of heart. Oh, and by the way, this is not a game I would recommend as anybody's first Yakuza game, but I would recommend it as a midpoint in the franchise. It's a fascinating flawed gem, and for all of its mess and length, I'll always have a soft spot for it. And now we have Lost Judgment. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Lost Judgment here in a ranking video and not near the top? And yeah, that's the beauty of ranking these types of games. The opinions are so varied. But let's actually go over why I placed what many would consider the superior Judgment over the original. Now, Lost Judgment to me is a good game, but Judgment, the original, simply hit harder where it mattered the most. And for me, that's always the story. I value narratives and stories so highly in single player games. Now let's start with the obvious and what Lost Judgment does best, and that's the gameplay. There is no question about it. The gameplay in Lost Judgment is absolutely top tier. Yagami feels incredible to control, with 3 main fighting styles, so that's Tiger, Crane, and the newly introduced Snake style. All of them feel very smooth and polished. You can juggle enemies in the air, parry incoming attacks, and pull off these, flashy heat moves that never really get old. Even the optional boxer star from the DLC, while a little broken, had some variety. Honestly, this is one of the best combat systems in the entire Yakuza / Judgment / Like a Dragon franchise. Maybe it is the best, who knows. If I were ranking purely on gameplay, this would be near the top. Exploration is also a big improvement over the first game. You get both Kamurocho and Yokohama to explore, and the skateboard adds a bit of speed to getting around. Side content is absolutely packed in here. The high school stories alone has enough content and side plots to feel like its own game. Some of them do hit very hard and some are a bit boring, but they give Lost Judgment its own identity. And of course the side cases are still great, giving us those more serious and of course absurd moments in that classic RGG way. But here's the thing with Lost Judgment. The story did not land at all for me the way it did in Judgment. It's not bad by any means, far from it. It's got all sorts of themes: bullying, revenge, justice, vengeance, and Koana is a decent antagonist. But I never felt as personally invested in Yagumi's journey this time around. It felt more like he was reacting to the plot instead of being emotionally tied to it. Judgment's story had more urgency, more heart, and Kuroiwa is one of the better antagonists to witness. I also think Lost Judgment's story for some reason kept repeating itself over and over until something big happened. There are still weak points too. The stealth sections, the chases, and the tedious parkour stuff is back, and they're still not fun. So yeah, this is a strong game, but not quite a classic in a way I like it to be. Okay, now next up is a game that many would consider one of the worst in the entirety of Yakuza, but not for me. And this one is Yakuza Kiwami 2. Now, if you're an OG, and I mean you play the original Yakuza 2 on the PS2, which I did not, then I do get the criticisms for the game. But since I did not experience any of what people are talking about, I can judge the game based on what I played in Kiwami 2, and safe to say I liked it. For me, Kiwami 2 was a fun, solid entry into the series that gave me exactly what I wanted. A good story, a great Dragon Engine experience, entertaining side content, and one of the most iconic villains in the entire franchise. Ryuji Goda is incredible. He completely carried the story for me. Just his presence, his drive to become the one true dragon, and that ongoing feud between him and Kiryu gave the story a pretty nice focused energy that a lot of Yakuza games don't really always manage. The dragon vs dragon rivalry is simple, but I guess that's part of why it works so well. And yes, I know OG Yakuza 2 fans have issues with the game, as I said, and I do see where they're coming from. They say this remake cut content, it changed the tone, and missed some pretty important story beats, and I'm not gonna argue with that. But again, for somebody who did not grow up playing the PlayStation 2 version, I wasn't comparing it to anything. What I got was a great stylish crime drama that moved at a decent pace, well, especially for a Yakuza game, and Kiwami 2 had some great emotional moments, especially towards the end. Also, I love the dynamic between Kiryu and Sayama, and it is kind of disappointing how she just left. But hey, what are you gonna do? Combat wise, I found it pretty fun. Sure, it's not as deep or fast as later Dragon Engine games like Lost Judgment, and yes, the blocking can get annoying, but I like the weight behind Kiryu's attacks. Then there's the cities, Kamurocho and Sotenbori. These looked amazing. Just, walking around in that Dragon Engine neon lit detail looked incredible, especially if you compare it to its original. If I had to nitpick, I'd probably say some boss fights were way too easy. Now this game might not be perfect, and I totally get why purists prefer the original, but from my perspective, Kiwami 2 is a strong, memorable part of the franchise that I feel like deserves a bit more love than it gets. This one might be a surprise. Seeing Yakuza 3 so high up in the rankings might be a strange thing to see, but strangely I liked Yakuza 3, maybe more than I should have. I think it's a great game. It's the one game that made me feel. It's the first Yakuza game that simply wasn't 100% entertainment, as this game was a game that gutted me emotionally. The story, the characters, the island of Okinawa, and the very emotional death of Rikiya made this game truly unforgettable. I get why people dunk on it, I really do. The combat is a janky mess. Enemies block like they're literally allergic to punches, and it's the first game after the beautiful Kiwami 2, so the technical drop is pretty evident. But none of that took away from the fact that I absolutely love this game. Let me talk a bit more about Rikiya though. Hands down, his death is the saddest moment in the entire franchise for me. Watching Kiryu cry out of agony, completely shattered and vulnerable, just broke me. Rikiya felt like somebody I thought who would evolve over future games, and felt like he was a brother, a disciple, and genuinely one of the warmest people Kiryu has ever had in his corner. We watch him geek out over Kamurocho, we watch him, get his back tattoo finished, and we watch him bond bond with Kiryu like a little sibling, and then by the time he dies, it hurts a lot. And you know what, kudos to RGG for developing such a character evolution like that. Now beyond the heartbreak and the sad moments, Yakuza 3 gave me something I did not know I needed, and that was Dad Kiryu. The Morning Glory orphanage could have easily been filler content, but it was not. I grew to care deeply about each one of those kids. The beach, the house, the everyday moments, it felt pretty entertaining to play. This was the first game in the franchise where we saw Kiryu in a much calmer and a much different light. Is the story a little cheesy at times? Sure. The CIA twin thing is fucking dumb, and Andre Richardson trying to speak English was unintentionally hilarious.
If you're looking for Daigo, Mine's taken him up to the roof.
But I'd rather take bold, weird swings than these bland, forgettable plotlines. Mine, the main antagonist, surprised me too. He's one of my favorite villains in the series. He was a tragic character, to be fair. His death left me unexpectedly shocked. The combat is the game's weakest point. You know, there's the whole Yakuza 3 meme, which is valid, but let's forget about that. The vibes of Okinawa felt perfect. It's very peaceful and full of life. It gave the whole game a unique identity because we don't really see places like this in the franchise. So while others may rank Yakuza 3 near the bottom, for me it's here in the video for a reason. It's a game that has a lot of soul, it's a game that has pain, and it's got Kiryu crying on his knees. And I wouldn't change a damn thing. Well, maybe I would, it's the combat. We need a Kiwami 3 so badly. Yakuza Kiwami is kind of an interesting one, isn't it? This is a game that doesn't always get the spotlight, but definitely earns its place. Now, Kiwami had a bit of a tough job. It had to modernize the very first Yakuza game originally released back in 2005 and follow up Yakuza 0, which, spoiler alert, is my favorite and many others' favorite Yakuza game in the franchise. That's no easy task. But what Kiwami does well, it does really well. For starters, the emotional core of the story hits the spot. This is the game where we really see Kiryu take on that father figure role to Haruka, and the connection between them becomes a driving force for the whole series moving forward. And thanks to the additions made in the remake, Nishikiyama, who is Kiryu's former best friend turned antagonist, gets way more depth than he had in the original. And yes, I did play the original. For some reason I played Yakuza 1 but never played Yakuza 2. It's weird, I know. But his transformation feels like it was handled very well, and honestly kind of heartbreaking. Another standout for me is combat. Kiwami builds on the style switching system from Yakuza 0 and adds the Majima Everywhere mechanic. Now yes, it gets a little goofy and a little grindy, but it's also one of the most entertaining ways to unlock a fighting style in the entire series. You never quite know where Majima will pop up. One minute he's hiding under a traffic cone, the next he's running a cabaret club dressed as Goromi. It's ridiculous, sure, but it's also classic Yakuza. This is a serious franchise, but when it gets weird, it gets weird. The fighting style itself feels great too. Kiryu controls tightly, and the dragon style, while a bit of a grind to unlock fully, offers some of the most satisfying moves in the game. And if you're a fan of the Tiger Drop, well, this is where it starts, becoming legendary. Now visually, Kiwami holds up very well. Kamurocho is kind of depressing and charming as ever, and while it shares a lot of assets with Yakuza 0, it still manages to feel like its own game. There is definitely a more colder, slightly more somber atmosphere here that matches the story's tone. Of course, no Yakuza game is complete without side content, and while Kiwami isn't as packed as the later games, it still offers plenty of those weird sub-stories and minigames to get lost in. You've got the classic racing pocket circuit cars, taking on weird jobs for strangers, or just things like that. At the end of the day, Yakuza Kiwami is a game that feels like a very important part of Kiryu's saga. It literally bridges past and future. This game still holds up, flaws and all, and that's why it earned its spot at number 5. This game right here was my game of the year for 2024. Well, that's not really saying much considering 2024 was one of the worst years for video games, but Infinite Wealth is a fantastic game. Is it better than the games after? That's debatable, but it's still a very, very good game. This is a sequel that takes everything Like a Dragon did and kicks it into overdrive. Is it perfect? Not quite, but it is one of the most ambitious and purely fun entries in the entire franchise. Infinite Wealth sees Ichiban Kasuga return as the series torchbearer, who's now joined by our favorite Kiryu in a kind of rare co-protagonist setup. and it works for the most part. While some people argue that Ichiban feels sidelined at times, there's no denying that the chemistry and crossover between the two main characters adds a lot to the overall experience of the game. I do think Kiryu's bucket list storyline brings some of the series' most emotional moments, and seeing his legacy that we've experienced in past games tie into Ichiban's story is so good, and it feels like a beautiful nostalgic payoff, especially for fans of the older games. Now let's talk gameplay, because this is where Infinite Wealth absolutely shines. The turn-based combat introduced in Like a Dragon is back, and I love it. Now it's faster, smarter, and way more fun. I do think this is one of the best turn-based games ever made. You can move characters around during battle, pull off some unique combos, use the environment to your advantage, and really make the most out of every turn. The job system also got a massive upgrade. There's more variety, more depth, and less grind. You're actually encouraged to experiment and play with different builds, and almost every job feels useful and fun to play. In fact, I don't think I missed out on playing a certain job, because they did such a good job with the system. And of course, the side content is as over the top and memorable as ever. You've got Sujimon battles, which was quite fun. You can run your own island resort on Dondoko Island, which was a massive addition that I loved playing. I do wish it was a bit longer though, as I'd max out everything within 5 or 6 hours. Hawaii is a fantastic setting too. It's very colourful and packed with some interesting characters that gives the game the classic Yakuza silliness that it's always had. Now you may be thinking, with all the positives I said, how is it not placed any higher? Well, let's talk about that. When it comes to the story, I loved it. Well, for most of it, to be honest. It did stumble quite a bit. It starts out very strong, but as the game goes on, the pacing starts to slip. Some of the new characters just don't hit. The villains feel a little weak, and juggling two protagonists causes the plot to lose focus at times. It's not bad at all, just not quite as tight or emotional as the story in Like a Dragon. I'll go over that game when I talk about it. That said, there are still plenty of memorable moments, especially from Kiryu's side. His story ends in a very heartbreaking way and hits quite hard, and the same with Ichiban too. So while Infinite Wealth doesn't quite match the previous game in terms of story, it more than makes up for it with amazing gameplay, tons of content, and just a great game overall. Okay, so at number 3 we've got Judgment, a spin-off from the Yakuza series that manages to stand out in its own while still feeling right at home in Kamurocho. Now if you're somebody that feels a little burnt out on Yakuza but still want that same, flavor with a fresh twist, Judgment is the next perfect step. The game puts you in the shoes of Takayuki Yagami, a former lawyer turned private detective, and right away I love the vibe of this game. It just feels different. Yagami isn't a Yakuza member or a crime boss, he's just a regular man, well sort of, trying to do the right thing, and that shift in perspective gives the whole story a more grounded detective thriller vibe. Now of course there are still plenty of over the top fights and wild side stories that we expect from RGG. Speaking of story, this is Judgment's biggest strength. And I do think it's one of the best stories that RGG has ever done. It's so, mature in how it deals with a lot of things, like crime, justice, and redemption. I do know that a lot of people actually rank it up there with Yakuza 0 and 7 in terms of story quality, and for good reason too. It's well paced for the most part, with a great selection of characters and a mystery that actually keeps you hooked all the way through, which I thought was not the case in Lost Judgment. Kuroiwa and even Shono are fantastic characters, especially Kuroiwa, who I do think is one of the better antagonists that RGG has written. Now yes, he's technically not the main antagonist, but you get my point. Combat here is more in line with the older Yakuza games, so that's fast paced and real-time brawling, but Yagami brings his own type of combat. He's very agile and has access to flashy wall jumps, and these insanely fast dodges that give fights a more dynamic feel. Some people say the combat doesn't quite hit the depth of the later games, but it's still a great experience, especially once you unlock his late game abilities. Now of course not everything lands perfectly. The detective mechanics, things like tailing suspects, examining crime scenes, or picking locks sound great on paper, but often just feel boring to do. The tailing missions in particular get repetitive very quickly, and there are quite a few of them. Thankfully these elements were toned down in Lost Judgment. The side content is a ton of fun, and I thought the likes of the drone racing and VR minigames were top notch. Same goes for the friend system and the side cases, which I love doing. And these feel like some of the most well thought out content in the game, because you get to know the people of Kamurocho in a deeper way, and there is actually a nice payoff if you invest in those relationships. So yeah, Judgment does not rely on Yakuza to carry it, and that's part of what makes it feel so fresh. That's why Judgment comes in at number 3 in my video. When Yakuza Like a Dragon launched, it was a game that objectively refined the entire Yakuza franchise and in an unknowing way. However, it turned out to be a masterpiece of a game. Swapping out the franchise's signature real-time combat for a turn-based RPG combat system was a massive risk, but it paid off in unexpected ways. While the shift in gameplay remains kind of divisive, I do think many people who disliked it at first are growing to like it. Like a Dragon is at its core a very deeply emotional, well put together great game that stands among the best in the series. At the center of it all is our favorite Ichiban Kasuga. Now he's very different to Kiryu. In fact, saying he's different is a bit of an understatement. Ichiban is hopeful, he's open-hearted, and sometimes a bit goofy and dopey, but he's always positive, something entirely different to Kiryu. I love seeing the progression of how he started as a low-level Yakuza who takes the fall for somebody else but finds himself in the world. It's very classic JRPG kind of stuff. This game handles gameplay very differently than what we're used to, as now we're seeing stuff like party members, we're seeing leveling up, and there's a whole system to it. But you know what really makes the story of this game special to me is how it sticks to the things that have always mattered in Yakuza. One of the best parts of the story is how it shows characters who reflect each other. You know, for example, take Ichiban's rival Masato Arakawa. He reminded me a lot of Nishiki from Yakuza 1, and I'm sure he did for you as well. But his story goes in a different direction. Unlike Nishiki, Masato gets a chance at redemption. Their final fight is stripped off over-the-top visuals and all these crazy moves. It's just two brothers fighting, full of emotion. It shows how far Ichiban has come to that point. The rest of the characters, or rather team, are also great. Adachi, Nanba, Saiko and others have fantastic backstories. That said, characters like Zhao and Jungi Han don't get as much time to shine, which is a bit of a shame. There isn't much more to say than what I said about Infinite Wealth. The turn-based combat system is great, and it does get expanded on in Infinite Wealth. Boss fights, especially later in the game, are great in terms of the story, but I will admit it does take quite a long time and require a lot of grinding to beat. The fight with Tendo, for example, is very exciting, and in terms of the story it's incredible, but it also shows how the combat can drag. Still, Infinite Wealth looks like it fixes many of the issues, but again, the story for me in single player games is what I value so highly, and for that reason Yakuza 7 has a perfect story, and that's why it's here in the video. And the number one game is no surprise Yakuza 0, a game that I genuinely think has maybe one or two flaws, and I would have to dig deep to find them. This is what many people would consider the best game, and I agree. It's one of those rare games that just gets everything right. It's got an incredible story, it's got fantastic side content, and it's got some of the better characters in the franchise, all wrapped up in a setting that just gives you that 80s style. Now let's actually talk about why it's so great first. You play as two main characters, Kiryu and Majima, each with their own storyline that I would honestly say feels like two beautifully written standalone games, and it's all tucked into one game. Kiryu's story is a story about trying to clear his name and protect a tiny piece of land at the center of a massive power struggle. Majima's story is definitely more tragic, focusing on his broken past and his slow return to being his true self. Both of their stories eventually connect in ways that hit hard emotionally. The villains are great too. Kuze, Awano and Shibusawa are the perfect Yakuza type antagonists you could ask for, and I don't think I'd change much about them. Each one of them is memorable, and once their roles in the story start to unfold, the story really goes from a 9 to a 10. The game also nails pacing. Yes, the intro is quite slow, but once you're past the start of the game, I don't think it slows down or drags at all whatsoever. There's a lot of plot twists, betrayals, emotional moments, you name it. This game has everything. I mean, there's the very, and I mean very shocking truth about Tachibana, to the very emotional ending with Majima and Makoto. And you know, on top of the incredible story, Yakuza 0 offers some of the best side content in any game. The sub-stories are weird, heartfelt and just great. I remember the one about Shinji, which I thought was cool to see because he appears in Yakuza Kiwami. There's the dominatrix one, the fortune teller. There's so many memorable sub-stories in Yakuza 0. Even the classic minigames like karaoke, darts, disco and pool, these are all genuinely fun too. Now something that deserves a talking point are the business minigames. I do think these are incredible. There's the real estate for Kiryu, which was good, but more importantly and better, the cabaret club for Majima, which is probably alongside the Dundoko Island from Infinite Wealth the best side content this franchise has had. Combat is pretty good too, but there are better Yakuza games for that part. I do like the Majima fighting styles in this game, which to be fair is quite different. Now here's the downside. This game is so good that it takes a while for Yakuza games to match the same experience. That is until you get to Yakuza 7. It's weird because Yakuza 0 is a prequel, but it was built with all the knowledge and polish of the later games. So when you go into Yakuza Kiwami or other games right after, it can feel rough by comparison and, less emotional, weaker pacing and older design choices. Still, Yakuza 0 is a masterpiece. It's one of the best in the Yakuza franchise, and it's one of the best video games hands down. If I ever made a top 20 video games of all time, you bet your ass you will see Yakuza 0 in there.